Hi, I'm Lisa from Sew Over It, and I'm going to show you how to attach a facing to a neckline. For this, I'm going to be using our Ultimate Shift Dress pattern. Okay, I've stitched my shift dress together. I've left the centre back seam open, only for you guys to be able to see this more clearly. If you were sewing this, you would have already sewn your centre back neckline opening and the rest of the seam together. The facing is joined at the shoulder seams, and I've run a zigzag stitch all the way along the bottom edge of the facing. So to start off with, we're going to pin our facing right sides together to the top of our dress. I'm going to start by lining up my shoulder seams on the facing and on the dress. Then lay the rest of the facing around the neckline, being careful not to stretch it. So there's my facing fully pinned to my neckline, and now I'm ready to sew that on. So the seam allowance is 1 centimetre, so I'm going to line up with my centimetre marking on the base of the machine. I'm using a dark navy thread, not because I've gone mad, but because I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. So obviously, if you were making this at home, you'd be using a thread that blended much better. So we're doing a reverse. Take your pins out as you get to them. And stop at regular intervals to help you go around that curve. The whole time you should be looking at your guideline and making sure that you're sticking to your seam allowance. When you reach your shoulder seams, make sure the seams are pressed flat as they were, or if they were folded together, they're also going in the same direction as you had intended. So there it is, stitched all the way around. I'm going to trim off my loose threads. Now, because this is curved, in order for the facing to sit flat, we're going to need to clip into the seam allowance. So that means snipping at regular intervals, about 2 to 3 centimetres apart, going all the way through the seam allowance, but obviously not completely up to your stitching because you don't want to cut through that. So I'm about 1 millimetre or 2 away from my stitching. If you had a neckline that wasn't as curved as this, you'd only need to clip it in the curved points. It's only when you've got a curved edge that you need to clip. I'm now on the iron going to press this up towards my facing, ready for the understitching. The point of understitching is to help the facing sit inside the neckline and to stop it from rolling out. So to understitch, you need to stitch 2 millimetres from the seam join on the facing side. So it's a bit like a top stitch. We're working from the right side of the fabric. I'm going to line up the groove in my presser foot with the seam, and I'm going to move my needle over to the right. And away we go. We'll reverse in the same way. The whole time I'm making sure that this seam is feeding into the middle of the foot, which is my guideline. I'm not looking at the needle. You also want to make sure that the seam allowance is still facing upwards towards the facing. As you've ironed it that way, it should stay, but occasionally it can flip back. So here's my understitching in that shockingly dark thread. Slightly offensive to the eye, but you guys can see it, which is what matters. I'm now going to iron it again, this time tucking the facing inside the neckline. So that's my neckline edge finally pressed, and if you see, what I've done is I've just rolled over the outside garment slightly into the inside so that we don't see the seam join with the facing. I'm going to put it on so you can see, admire the work. So it will sit nice and flat. There shouldn't be any pulling because you've clipped into it. And just a little tip that if you were doing a V-neck with a facing, when you clip a nice V into the V-neck, and that will help the facing sit better. So if you're doing our tea dress, that would be a good tip to do.